Hey everybody, welcome to Australia at Home and to Guardian Australia's book club, and happy Friday. I am Steph Harmon. I'm the culture editor of Guardian Australia, and I am so excited about our guest today. I've been looking forward to it for weeks. But before I throw to him, I want to acknowledge that we are hosting this from Indigenous land. I'm personally sitting on the Gadigal land of the Eora Nation, and I know you'll join me in paying respects to elders past and present, and in recognising that this land was never ceded. For those who haven't been involved in one of these Australia at Home Zoom talks before, I've got a few tips. First, if you turn your cameras on and turn your screen to gallery mode on the top right corner, you'll be able to see everybody and get a sense of how many people have joined today. Second, this is the fun bit. If you open up the chat on the bottom of the screen, you can type in to introduce yourself, to ask questions for our guest, Jimmy Barnes, or for each other, or to make any comments and just chat as the talk proceeds. So we're going to be scanning that chat and calling up members of the audience during the discussion and unmuting your mics. So if you do have a question, look out for a message from one of our hosts who's going to invite you to ask the question to Jimmy yourself. Finally, we are filming all of this and we're live streaming it to Facebook, and a video is going to be posted to Guardian Australia after the event as well. So please keep yourselves nice. On to our guest. At Guardian Australia, we hate using words that are lazy and cliched, like legendary and iconic, but I can't really think of a better way to describe our guest today. So, the iconic Australian rock legend, Jimmy Barnes, blew us all away with his first memoir in 2016, Working Class Boy, and then somehow, very ridiculously, followed it up a year later with his rollicking second book, Working Class Man. He now has a third book, Killing Time, which is a collection of true stories which didn't fit into the first two, and which he's here today to talk to us about. Guardian Australia's music writer, Andrew Stafford, who is himself no stranger to the music memoir, is going to be leading the discussion today. So I will throw to them. Welcome, Andrew and Jimmy.
How you going, guys?
Thank you.
Hey, Andrew.
Hi, Jimmy. It's nice to talk to you. Hello, and welcome to everybody here. And I'm really honoured to host this edition of Guardian Book Club. And I'm equally honoured and indeed grateful to be speaking to our guest today, Jimmy Barnes, who, as Steph said, is launching his third book, Killing Time, into the world. The follow-up to the award-winning Working Class Boy and its sequel, Working Class Man. Killing Time is a collection of anecdotes and short stories, both from the road and at home, that fill in the gaps of a truly extraordinary life. There is another personal reason why I'm grateful to be speaking to Jimmy today. This is my first major working engagement since undergoing open heart surgery in early August. And I'm not telling you this because I want to make this about me, but to tell you something about Jimmy. Jimmy also underwent open heart surgery in 2007. Jimmy, we have something in common. We were both born with bicuspid aortic valve. And in late June, while I was waiting for the call up from hospital for surgery, Jimmy and his remarkable wife, Jane, got in touch and have been very kindly in regular contact since, offering their support. So, Jimmy, this is the first time I've actually seen you since then. I'll say a public thank you for your kindness at that time over the last few months. Welcome to Guardian Book Club. How are you?
I'm pretty bloody good, you know, and I'm glad you look so well. When Jane and I reached out to you, was just because we'd been through it, and we seen what you were going through, and we thought, because I remember going into surgery and thinking, God, I might not make it out. And I wanted to reassure you that you would. It might be a bit painful, but you were going to get out of there, you know, and look at you, jumping at your skin.
As I just mentioned, just briefly, I want to touch on this. It's 10 weeks for me since the surgery on Monday, and you went and did something very silly after 9 or 10 weeks, didn't you?
Yeah, well, you know, the doctors, it's a classic thing. The doctors say to you, they warn you. They say, Jimmy, after about 8 weeks, you're going to start to feel good, and you'll want to get up and do stuff. Don't do it. You've got to do at least 12 weeks or something, they said, before you even, think about doing anything. And of course, literally, it got to 8 weeks almost on the day, and I felt fantastic. So I immediately rang my agent and said, "We got any gigs?" And he said, "Yeah, I've got you one." And so he had a show that I rang my doctor first. I sort of played it down. I said, "Can I do the show? It's only a little show. My son David's going to be there. Mahey is going to be there. They'll all sing with me." I didn't tell him it was in Kuala Lumpur, and so I had to fly to KL. I did a 2-hour show. It was like 40 degrees, and because I hadn't sang for 2 months, I just went nuts and screamed like a banshee. And of course, that was great at the moment, but I came off stage and suddenly I had these pains in my chest. And the next day, I just, I took some painkillers. Next day, I got on the plane, came back to Sydney, and had to go straight in the hospital, and that opened me up and drained me again. It was a nightmare. And you think you'd learn from that. I did the same thing 8 weeks later, so it was just ridiculous. I'm glad you didn't do that.
Well, I'm not in a position to do something, but this rock, I think it was Lemmy from Motorhead who said this rock and roll thing is bad for the human life. We've had some sad news this week, of course, Jimmy. You commented about the passing of Eddie Van Halen and dropped the bombshell that you were actually asked to join the band.
Yeah.
And I presume that would have been immediately after David Lee Roth's departure. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, I mean, I was in Los Angeles at the time, and I was just finishing up the Working Class Man album, and it was just after David Lee Roth left, and I'd actually been in the studio mixing, and it was 5, 6 o'clock in the afternoon. I came home, and Jane was in the apartment we were staying in, and we had Mahalia, who was very small at the time, and Mahalia was asleep, and Jane was rushing. She wanted to go shopping. That's why I rushed home. And she said, the baby's asleep. Make sure you watch the baby. And she grabbed the bag and she was heading out the door. And she said, oh, by the way, Eddie Van Halen rang for you. And I went, sure he did. And so she walked out and I went into the lounge room, and there on the table was a phone number for Eddie. And sure enough, he asked me if I would, come around and see him. And I said, well, I'd love to, Eddie, but I'm actually babysitting at the moment. And so he was very sweet. He said, I'll come to you. And like a half an hour later, it was a knock at the door, and it was Eddie Van Halen. I think it was Ted Templeton, the producer, was with him. And obviously Eddie was, looking for a singer, and he wanted to know if I was interested in doing it. And I said, I'm a big fan of Van Halen, but I've literally just left a band. I've been in a band for 10 years, and I'm enjoying being a solo performer. I said, but if you need me to scream on your record anyway, give me a yell, but I'm not really ready to join a band. And, it was a big honor to be asked, and I was thrilled because I was a fan of his, but I just couldn't do it. But later on, just when Sammy Hagar left, a couple of years ago, they rang my office again. So they were obviously he was a bit keen, and that was really nice. Somebody's told me since that Eddie was a big Cold Chisel fan, and he loved Mossy. And loved me, so so that was a nice thought. It was a real sad loss, one of those guitar players that comes along in a generation that inspired millions of young boys to play guitar, young and girls to play guitar, all over the world. And he was completely unique, incredible. And
Eddie famously lived very hard, just as you have. Do you get a there, but for the grace of God go I, when you hear news like that?
Well, Eddie was taken by cancer, so I don't know whether that was directly related to his lifestyle or not. But listen, he was a pretty, he was a wild boy when I met him, and so was I. But he tore on for years. So I think there could have been a million things that killed me long before this, if not by the grace of God. So I'm really I'm pretty lucky just to be sitting here. Never mind healthy as well.
Yeah, the concept of the title "Killing Time" is that so much of rock and roll is about waiting. Mm-hmm. All that hanging around.
That'll kill you. That'll kill you.
Yeah, I was going to ask that. Is all that hanging around one of the main reasons why so many musicians find themselves in trouble, that and playing in pubs?
Well, I think there's a bit of it, where you'll find a lot of musicians are pretty driven, and I know a lot of musicians who are driven because they're running from their past, or they've got issues, and there's not all of them, but there's a hell of a lot of them, and and it's very easy to fall into the whole trap of just self-medicating. I remember because I've been drinking and taking drugs since I was I think since I was 12 years old, and at 16 I was on the road with Cold Chisel, and I was just going really hard, and I didn't realize then that of course that what I was running from, but I was happy just not to feel. As long as I could go out, get up there, whatever I could throw in myself, so that I didn't have to sit with my own feelings or look at myself and just keep running flat out of the wall. I was happy. So, and I think that's a common thing with musicians too. And and because creative people tend to be quite sort of intense, you do get bored. There is, Charlie Watts had the famous quote, you know, you spend 22 hours of the day waiting to get on stage and do the thing you love for 2 hours, you know, and literally that's what it's like, you know, you spend 22 hours schlepping about, you know, whether it's, you know, waiting for hire cars, driving for 8 hours to a show, you get to the hotel and you can't check in, you know, because the room's not ready and you can't check in for another 4 hours. So you wander around town and what do? You go to the pub? I don't know. We certainly didn't go to libraries, you know, and then, you know, then you go to sound check and the gear's not arrived. So you have to wait. And then you're waiting for the doors to open up. And then you do the show and bang, it's this huge euphoria. And then finished, you're back in the hire car and you're driving for another 8 hours, and it just goes on. And we, you know, like for us in cultures, we did that, you know, we were doing 8 shows a week. So and you know, one day you'd be in Melbourne, next day you'd be in Sydney, and you were driving. And so there'd be, you know, 5 of us in a station wagon lying across the top of, you know, suitcases and, you know, trying to get some sleep anyway, when we could sleep, whenever we could. So it's a pretty full-on life, and that's not an excuse for my behavior. I reckon a lot of my behavior was driven just from, I know now, from childhood trauma and not wanting to face myself.
Yeah, you anticipated my next question effectively, that you were bringing a lot of your own demons to the table, you know, long before you entered that life and lifestyle. But I was wondering something else, you know, if just the act of getting up on stage and singing some of these songs, including, in fact, some of your most recent songs, not just earlier songs from the earlier days of Cult Chisel, but later ones, involves actually reliving a kind of trauma and then needing to douse that any way you could.
Yeah, well, you know, there was a period, you know, like doing those, you know, early Chisel stuff, you know, I mean, and all the Chisel stuff. There was a period where I felt that Don Walker must have been reading my mail, because he'd write a song, and you know, not only could I get up and just, you know, the good melody to sing, I felt the lyrics. I felt, you know, I felt like an outsider, standing on the outside. I felt like I didn't belong. You know, I know he was writing about bloody, you know, somebody he met, you know, William Mundy or somebody he met in Parramatta jail. But it felt like me. I always felt like I didn't fit in anywhere, and I had to kick down doors to get in. So, you know, I'd sing his songs, and it just, you know, I was a misfit. You know, that's what I was. And it felt like he was writing about me. So I connected with those lyrics very easily. You know, I think possibly sometimes they were too close to the bone, and that even affected me, you know, differently. But as I sort of slowly started working through my own issues, like particularly since writing that first book, you know, you look at a record like My Criminal Record, and, you know, I found that, you know, where in the past, you know, I had a couple of emotions I could go to when I sang. Most of them were anger and fear. You know, I found that I could still access those emotions very easily, because they, you know, I've recognized a lot of stuff about myself, and it's pretty easy just to scratch the surface and feel that, you know, really vividly, like it's right there. You're there at the time. But I've also been able to tap into myself and just, you know, just feel a lot of different things, you know, whether it's fear, whether it's love, whether it's hope, whether it's, you know, shame. I can go into it without being overwhelmed by it so much now. So I think because of that, I've become a better writer and a better singer.
So you've been able to create a kind of a little bit more distance between you and those more visceral emotions, so you don't get sucked in the same.
Yeah. Well, basically, because I've literally, for so many years, I didn't even look at those feelings in myself. I didn't think about it. I just, you know, I knew I felt ashamed all the time. I felt guilt-ridden and fearful, but I didn't want to ever face that. So I just, you know, I tried to keep running ahead of my demons, and I've spoke about that a lot in the past. You know, one of the things, big lessons I learned is, no matter what you're running from, eventually it's going to catch you. If you're running from something, you're going to trip or fall up. You know, and the best thing you can do is turn and face it. You know, it might be painful for a while, but it's a bit like heart surgery. But you know, if you turn and face it and go through it, there's a chance you're going to come out the other side better off.
You just made me think of a song on My Criminal Record, Shutting Down Our Town, which was written by Casa Daly, and you must have felt like he'd crawled inside your head.
I did. He actually read the first book and rang me and said, "I want to write a song for you about this book." And I said, "Yeah, please do." And Troy hasn't come from an easy background either. Maltese Aboriginal. Living in Grafton. He's seen his share of tough times, and he's seen people struggle, and he's had his own struggles. And we wrote a few songs for that album, and one of them was called "My Demon." And so I actually was talking to Troy just before, and Troy's been making a new record, and he said that I said, how'd you go? Because he had to go home, and he's been in lockdown, in a hotel in Queensland for 2 weeks. And he just said, look, I could go crazy sitting with myself, or I could sit and write. And he sat there, and he spent the time, and he's written 8 or 10 songs or something. So it's, Troy, had a good sense of feeling of what I was going through and what I've been through. And I think he put it in that song. Once again, I was so comfortable singing that song because it sort of said the things that I wanted to say about Elizabeth. It wasn't just about Holden's, shutting down. It was everything shutting down. Elizabeth was the sort of place where where they stuck immigrants and hoped they would go away. It was like they opened up. I think Holden's and the South Australian government had something going on, and the government gave them land cheap, and it was the worst land in the world. There's nothing grows out there, and they said, here, build your factory here, and we'll give you a workforce. And basically, the workforce came mostly from northern Britain. Because the things like shipbuilding and all that, shutting down after the war and stuff like that. And we had a lot of problems in Scotland. I know I can only talk for my own family. We had a lot of problems that we thought we could run away to Australia and escape. And literally all we did was just move them, 12,000 miles to Elizabeth. And suddenly we're on our own in a strange land, bloody, with the same problems. So it was a bit of a tough place.
You obviously did relive a lot of trauma in writing those first 2 books. Mm-hmm. Before we come back to Killing Time, can you tell us a little bit more about the writing process for you at that time? And in particular, what I'm curious about here is how you were able to navigate the very intense emotions that would have arisen in the process of doing that.
Well, it was, I got to the point really where, because I avoided all these, looking at my life, looking at my feelings, looking at my fears, for so long that I got to a point where I couldn't avoid it anymore. It was either start to look at them or die. And I got to the point where I woke up one day, as I've said in the book, I woke up one day and there was a noose hanging in the bloody, a rope tied, cord tied around a rail in the dressing room. And it was only then that I'd been so drunk that I remembered hanging off that rope. So yeah. I got to that point where I had no choice. It was either do it or die. And I started asking, and I'm one of those people who's always sort of, I've always thought I was, brave, I thought it was tough and, in a chest beating sort of way, yeah. full of bravado. But it was only then that I realized, to tackle this stuff, it wasn't about bravery, it was about courage. And courage to strip yourself bare and look at the worst things in your life and the worst things that you've done, the worst things that you've felt, and try to deal with them. And so that's when I first, I went and seen a therapist. And prior to that, I literally thought, if you went and seen a therapist, if you seen a shrink, you were nuts, and it was a sign of weakness. But in fact, when I got to that point and I did it, I felt literally, I've said this in the past, I felt like it's the first time in my life I've been courageous. And that's where I started to climb the hill to get over. And part of that therapy, I think, was just me. I had to sit at my computer alone and write that book. And a lot of the stuff in that book, there was a lot of stuff that, of course, that I knew and that I didn't want to talk about. But as it evolved and as the writing took place, I just slowly realized I had to get it out. And literally, I sat and wrote for myself. I wrote for myself.
I've just seen a good question come up in the chat that I wanted to ask as well. Whether or not you, and this was from Georgia, hello Georgia, whether or not you read any other rock memoirs before tackling your own.
I read a lot of memoirs. I read a lot of them. Not just rock memoirs. So, one of the best memoirs I read prior to writing that book was a book called Harpo Speaks, which was Harpo Marx's memoir.
Yeah.
And you know, Harpo was the funny guy who never said it, never did interviews. And he was, you know, incredibly smart, but also wild as hell. And, you know, obviously running from lots. And his book was really, really not only just entertaining, but sort of insightful. I read a lot of rock memoirs, but, you know, the trouble is that with a lot of the memoirs, I thought Springsteen's was good, for instance, you know. I thought it was a very good read. But, you know, I mean, I read everything from the Motley Crue book to bloody, you know, Ronnie Wood, Keith Richards, you know, you name them. I picked them up. I read as many as I could. And I learned a bit from most of them. You know, one of the things I didn't want to do with that book was to you know, because, you know, the Motley Crue book's pretty, you know, if you want a story of sex, drugs, and rock and roll, that's the book to read because it's just full on. And, you know, and it sounds ludicrous to the stuff they're doing, but I think it was probably pretty real. But I didn't want to write a book that just glorified, you know, sex and drugs and rock and roll, you know, and by that point, you know, it was, I wanted to write about, you know, the darkness of it, you know, and not only where I was, but where it came from. And that's what I had to unravel that for myself before I could move on.
Yeah, both of those first two books really make me think that ultimately they're about the consequences of not just in the cliche sense, sex, drugs, and rock and roll, but everything that kind of goes into the creative act in the first place. And that, like I said before, often does involve a lot of trauma.
Yeah, well, you know, so the first book, the first one of my books, I wrote, and I literally got to the end of it, Andrew, and I remember, you know, thinking I was finished, and I thought I could just burn it now. You know, it's done its job. It's, you know, I faced it, and I put it down. I wrote it down and relived it. And every night I'd finish it, and I'd just be on the floor. You know, I'd just not want to really face it. And I wake up and I go, I'm glad that's out.
Yeah.
You know, and then, you know, or I get off the computer and I go and do, you know, ring the therapist for an hour, you know. And there was things that the therapist would point out that I hadn't even realized what I was writing, you know. And I'd tell him what I'd written about. He'd go, do you think you were angry with her? And I go, shit, was I? I don't know. You know? And then I think about it, I go, yeah, you know. And so it opened up other avenues for me to look at as I was writing.
How much of a role did he play? You thanked your therapist in Killing Time as being one man who really earns his money.
Oh, he bloody earned his money. I mean, when I first started going, you know, because a lot of people told me to see a therapist, and I went, nah, you know. But when I started going, you know, it was, you know, an hour. It was going to be an hour a week, and I ended up going like 3 or 4 times a week, you know, for a long time, just because I needed to get it all out. And as I opened the floodgate, it sometimes became overwhelming, and it was, you know, and in the middle of it, you know, I was not only trying to deal with this, but I was also falling back into the same traps of, you know, drugs and, you know, trying to medicate and not feel. And then I go, no, I can't do this. So I'd call him all the time. And, you know, over the period of writing the book, it sort of evened itself out and sort of went back to once or twice a week and then back to once a week. So he was a huge help. And, you know, and I highly recommend it. You know, like I said, I did see it as a sign of weakness. And it wasn't only that I thought I was courageous. I think it's a good thing that most people should do. You know, trauma is very relative. It's not, you know, not everybody has to struggle or be abused or whatever. Everybody carries stuff around with them. And if you can let go of some of that shit, you know, really, I think you can become a better person and take a load off yourself, really. So I recommend it highly.
I also published a rock and roll memoir of my own last year, which also deals with some mental health issues. And there was an interesting piece in the Guardian, I think it was earlier this week, touching on the issue of whether it's actually brave to talk about mental health in public or not. In the case of your books, however difficult they might have been for you personally in the writing, they come across as being very driven affairs. That this is something that you absolutely had to write.
Oh yeah, and I think I had to share it. You know, one of the things that I thought was one of the things I got, you know, I felt really good about getting these stories out. You know, it was hard for them to be, you know, to tell people about sexual abuse and violence and not feeling safe with your own family, you know, your own parents and stuff. But you know, once I did it and I put it out there, I'd be walking down the street and I'd have grown men in blue singlets come up to me and breaking down and crying. and because they had stuff that they wanted to get off their chest. And I'd have to say, I was doing book signings, and I got a bunch of papers printed up, which had, numbers for Lifeline, for see therapists and all this sort of stuff. I give them, tell them things to do, because I was okay to opening up the wounds. I wasn't capable of dealing with it. But I think one of the best things I got from it was that we actually started a conversation, and some blokes started to look at themselves and maybe talk to someone. I told people, most important thing to do is talk to someone, your therapist, your partner, your friend, your cat, bloody whatever it is. Get it out, because it's going to kill you if you keep it inside.
Yeah. We've got a couple of questions from the audience at this point, and I just wanted to throw back to Steph Harmon, who I think has them ready to go.
Yeah, there's some lovely comments in there too. But Jill, are you ready to ask your question? Jill Biddington? Maybe not.
Sorry, Steph, I'm slow on the fingers. I am ready.
Hi, Jill.
Hi, Jill.
Jimmy, it's lovely to listen to you talking about this. We're kind of the same generation. I remember being very young and seeing you walk down the street in Brisbane as quite a much younger man with a bottle of clear alcohol. And it's great to see that you've lasted. I think it's so important that, the business that you're in needs legends. I know that's overused, but I guess that, I'm 58 and I'm reflecting a lot on life. And as a performer, you're a storyteller. You don't just sing, you're the teller of the story in the song. And now as a writer, you're telling your own stories, and I guess you're lending stories of your own lived experience. But how is it different? Like, what does it demand of you? What do you give in that process? I can understand what you say about laying your life bare and needing that courage, but I would imagine that it's a bit more than just that courage, and that you need to be connected to yourself in a different way.
You know what? The good question. But I honestly think that, singers, I was lucky that when I started telling stories, they were written by one of the best songwriters in the country, by Don Walker, and his stories were very complex in a lot of ways. And Don was sort of, Don was one of these sort of people who looked at other people. He sat back and watched people, and he wrote stories that, I thought that he was writing just for me. And it felt like he was writing for me, and it felt like he was writing about me. And sometimes that got really emotional for me. But I realized, probably more of late, but even towards the end of Cultures, that part of the reason why Cultures are connected with so many people is because so many other people could connect to those stories. So I think as a storyteller and as a singer, I've always just told stories that people can relate to. I mean, most of the songs I've sang and most of the songs I write now are always just, they're about something that's not just, that I can experience. It's something that, it is about normal stuff, like, like hope or loss of hope or fear or insecurity or rage or, things that we all feel and that we can all connect to. And I think that's for me is, I was lucky. Probably if I'd been left to my own means early in my career, I wouldn't have been able to portray that or connect with people so well, because I had a really great songwriter to give me the vehicle to do that. And over the years, I learned from him. He was as much part of my growth as the therapist. Don, if not more. Don was like my big brother, and he helped me find my voice, and he encouraged me to find my voice. As I wrote, Don would encourage me. One of the greatest compliments I got with the first book was from Don's mum, who's a writer, who's an author. And Don's mum said she really liked it. And just because I respected Don and his family so much, that, it made me feel like I was actually moving in the right direction. So it's good. I think as singers, we tell the stories that we're all feeling together. And I think that's really important. And you're still a spring chicken.
And Jimmy, more questions from the audience, but just before we go to that, I was going to ask you about this as well. I mean, no disparagement of your career and your earlier work in asking this, but do you feel in a strange way, and I'm not just talking about the books here, but also the music, that you found your own real voice late in life, in your 60s?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think I touched on just the surface of what I was feeling, you know, and, you know, when the songs I wrote, whether it was, you look at Rising Sun, I was making jokes about the girl I love running away, you know, and, you know, I didn't want to really feel the pain. So I wrote a sort of jolly, bloody rockabilly song about it, you know, you got nothing I want. You know, as much as I wrote that about the American record company, I realized it was probably more talking to myself, you know. So I can look now and see that I was scraping the surface. And I think you know, getting older, getting help, looking at my life and the first two books particularly, allowed me to find my own voice and allowed me to become a better writer and actually a better human being anyway. And I think that's, you know, they all went hand in hand. I'm sat at the keyboard trying to write the books many times before that. And it was always just dodging the issues, making light of everything. That's what I tended to do. You know, if it was too painful, I'd make a joke about it. And it got me in a lot of trouble.
I'm going to throw back, just before we start to talk a little bit more about killing time itself, I'm just going to throw back to Steph and the audience here.
Yeah, we had a great question from Kylie or Bill Hoyer. Is Kylie ready?
Hello. Hi, Jimmy.
Hi, Kylie.
First of all, I just want to say thank you, not just for your music, but my memories when I hear it, and it takes me back to just yesterday when I was 16, of course. But your daily music that you have on Facebook, and as we all know, we love your music. But my question is, your books, you talk about your trauma and how you dealt with that.
Yeah.
Was there an idea that it was therapeutic for you to write it and get it out, and or both to maybe help? Because I know men, as we move on in society, where men are encouraged more to talk about their feelings, but still in a lot of circles, it's the suck it up attitude, you're a man, get over it.
Yeah.
And I have 4 boys and I encourage them to communicate. So did you kind of hope that it would have that effect, that it's okay for men?
You know what, I didn't initially think about it, but, you know, as I was writing it, I realized that it was helping me to talk about these stuff. And I figured that, you know, and I think, you know, look, now, you know, a couple of years clear of writing that first book, I think that, that, you know, there's so many issues, all the issues that men have. There's a lot of men's issues, you know, let's face it, you know, and you know, that not just, you know, with their own self-esteem or their own sanity, you know, domestic violence, you know, even equality, you know, the basic human rights of equality. Men, you know, don't want to allow themselves to appear, you know, equal or weak or give anybody any ground. I think all these issues are so interwoven that, you know, that the more we talk about them, the more we're going to sort out a lot of problems. I don't think my book's going to do that, but if it helped tip a couple of people somewhere towards it, I think the more people that step up and say, you know, get help, the more you teach your sons, you know, to talk and be, you know, fair and open and feel safe to speak, the better world it's going to be. You know, I'd like to think that I had something to do with it. I didn't sit and write the books for that. Like I said, by the time I wasn't sure why I was writing until I really got into it, and then I realized it was therapeutic for me. It was cathartic. Yeah.
And we have a question from Lara Bickford. Lara, are you ready to go?
Come in, Lara.
Hi. Yes, I
Hi.
was unmuting. Hi, thank you. Hi, Jimmy. Thank you so
Hey, Lara,
much.
how you doing?
Great, thank you. Yeah, so thanks so much for your book. I just adored your first book especially and couldn't put it down, and then gave it to my younger sons to read. And I'm from Adelaide as well, and I felt at the time when I was reading it, it was incredible, the picture you painted of Elizabeth and how I lived actually on the other side down south in McLaren Vale, but how there was another side of our city and another life that I had no idea about. And I felt like wrong that I didn't know the other parts of how people were living. And what struck me was your incredible memory and detail in that first book. And that's how I feel like I know you, from how you described yourself as a child. How did you remember everything so well? I mean, my thoughts are, is it the stress and fears? And I think that puts your mind in a heightened sort of sense of awareness. And do you think that's how you remembered everything so incredibly well, and your feelings at the time?
I think so. Thanks for that. Yeah, I think so. I think you know, you know, you asked me what I had for breakfast yesterday. I probably couldn't tell you, but you know, I noticed that when I sat down to write, just the physical act of putting myself there and sitting with the feelings, things came back to me. You know, I remember a lot of things. I remember, I'm one of those people, you know, that I remember, you know, the house I was born in, and you know, and we left there at a very early age. You know, I mean, 8-10 months. And I've described it and drawn pictures of it. There's no photos, and my mum can't understand how I know. You know, I remember everything. I remember the taste, you know, smells of Glasgow, and I left when I was 5. I remember, you know, I can remember, you know, feeling afraid in Glasgow. You know, and I can only put it down. A lot of that stuff comes from fear and from trauma. So maybe that help me remember a lot of stuff. But I think just the physical act of sitting down and writing. And you know, and you know, you notice in those books I write a lot of dialogue, you know, and I don't remember every single thing my mum and dad said to each other, or Don Walker in this new book said to me. I don't remember word for word, but I know exactly how, you know, I remember exactly how they were and how Don is, and I know he talks with a North Queensland drawl, and so you use a bit of artistic license to fill in the dialogue, because you know what the conversation, the feel of the conversation. So, you know, there was a bit of license in there, but you know, the pictures I have of Elizabeth and as a child, particularly, are really, really vivid. As for the second book, you know, I know I was wasted most of the time, but unfortunately, I remember a lot of it, you know, and that you know, that's probably a curse, but I deserve it, you know.
You paint a great picture of Don Walker on the ski slopes of Japan, which is
yeah,
you clearly never expected to witness.
No, but neither did I. He's my dear friend. You know, the only time I'd seen Don in a ski mask is when he turned up for a photo shoot once with a shotgun, and so he wanted to look like a bank robber. But you know, Don, I've never thought Don would be skiing, and he's the only guy I've seen who skied without bending his knees. So it goes to show you.
Killing Time is very different in this sense. So you've talked about, you know, the difficulties of writing the first 2 books and having to kind of drag them out of yourself. Mm-hmm. But Killing Time reads like you're really having fun.
Yeah,
telling these stories, many of which are quite humorous.
Yeah, some of them. But you know, the funny thing is, when I was writing this, I thought these were all unrelated stories. You know, just, you know, like, this is a good yarn. It's a good yarn. As I got towards the end, I realized that a lot of these stories are really quite tied together in a way, and they're also tied to the first 2 books. You know, the stories I think are really funny, but I look at them and they're like, you know, all while I was like running away from my life or running amok, you know, life has a way of sort of sending out big red flags saying, hello, look at this, hello, do you know what you're doing? And I didn't see them at the time. You know, I tell that story in the book about, you know, in Los Angeles going into the fortune teller. You know, I mean, that story was, for me, it was just a funny story, because I remember walking in, staggering in, I fell out of a limousine in Los Angeles, wanted to get a bottle of vodka, and there was 2 shops together. One was a bottle shop, and one was a fortune teller. And I remember I'd seen the fortune teller shop before, because it had, you know, had the red drapes and the crystal ball on the table with a light spotlight on it and all that. And it looked like a set from, you know, the Munsters, you know. And so I knew that was there, but it was a marker for me so I could find the bottle shop. And this day I fell out the limousine on the way home from the studio, and I went to get a bottle of vodka, and the 2 doors were right next to each other, and I just wasn't, you know, compos mentis, and I walked straight into the fortune teller, and it was, you know, you walk in and suddenly the rooms all velvet curtains, and the sound went muffled and everything. Los Angeles went quiet, and there was sort of violin music, and the woman came out, you know, and I'm thinking, this is a funny story, you know. The woman came out, and she's you know, she's got the scarves, the red silk scarves, and the long flowing, you know, robe and all that sort of stuff. And literally, the first thing I thought was, she looks like Stevie Van Zandt, you know. You know? And I made a joke, is that you, Stevie? You know, and all sorts of stuff. And she was really serious, and you know, you know, Eastern European accent and all this sort of shit. And I knew I was in the wrong place. I'm thinking, this doesn't look like a bottle shop. What sort of spirits are they selling? And she tried to get me to stage, and I think she was after my money. But, you know, but I also look in retrospect, I think the world has a way of telling you things. And she said to me, you must stay. And I'm going, no, I've got to get out of here, back off, you know. And she's going, there's a curse on you, and I'm telling me something I don't know already. And I'm stepping back, and she said, someone very close to you is trying to kill you. I remember it vividly. And I said, yeah, all right, enough. And I backed out the shop, and I went and bought a bottle of vodka and went home. And I thought that was a funny story. And as I was writing in the book, for the book, you know, because I thought it was funny imagery that she looked like Stevie Van Zandt, who's a friend of mine, you know, all this sort of stuff. But as I wrote the book, I realized that was like the world telling me that somebody's cutting the lawn now, Jesus. The world telling me that, you know, it was her way of saying that someone close to you is trying to kill you. And only when I was writing the book, I realized she was right, and it was me, you know? So these stories, even some of the funny ones, have a way of showing me little lessons that I should have picked up at the time and I missed.
Wow. Well, some of the stories, had some of the stories originally found their way into the first couple of books and been cut out and thought, no, I'll save those for later?
No, not really. I mean, there's stories that were related and stuff like that. I mean, I'm sure I'll tell yarns about being in Los Angeles touring and stuff like that. But Los Angeles was like a black hole for me. Every time I went there, I was just filled with fear, and you know, part of that was because, you know, drugs were so cheap there. You know, and I got there and it was just, you know, I really just drowned myself, you know, in everything. But it was also, I just felt uneasy there. And it was, Los Angeles was such a place where so many dreams came crashing down, you know, so many people went there wanting to be stars and never made it and never made it out. And you see, it was just sad. You could see them everywhere. And it sort of reminded me of myself, I think, you know?
Yeah.
So I'm sure I've touched on parts of these stories before, but I didn't consciously save it and separate.
I'm seeing a few COVID-related questions coming through.
Yeah.
And you actually did start writing a COVID diary, excerpts of which appear in the back end of Killing Time. In fact, you're writing it on the Orient Express in February, March. I was going to ask about, you know, most rock and roll singers I know, and I know quite a number, are actually introverts by nature, and getting up on stage is like a release valve. That's how you connect with people. So I wanted to ask you about COVID and the impact on the arts and on live performance this year, and for that matter, on you too as a performer. Well,
I think, you know, one of the things that good things that COVID has done for me is made me sit with my feelings. You know, I mean, even with all the progress I'd made as a human being, as a you know, looking at myself, you know, at the end, I've been, you know, since the first book, I've been touring constantly. And as you know, I finished touring with Cold Chisel in February, and I needed a break. And the first thing I wanted to do was fly, train, travel, move, be in hotels, don't stop, because I didn't want to stop and feel still. You know, but COVID sort of made, I got as far as Thailand and the whole world shut down around me. And I had to sit and just be, you know, with myself and with Jane. And we came back home to the Highlands where we live. And, you know, Jane and I, we've been together 40 years, and we'd never sat in one place anywhere for 6 months. And it made me sit and Jane sit, and we had to use our time. You know, we could have gone crazy, like you know, a lot of people. I know a lot of people felt like that, but I had to do something. You know, like I was writing, I was practicing guitar, I was writing songs, I was reading, I was doing all the things that I always thought I could do, but I never seemed to have the time because I wouldn't sit bloody still long enough. And out of the COVID, you know, problem, you know, probably brought my family much closer, you know, because we got home, we got back here, and we thought, you know, and like you say, you know, part of my therapy every night was to get up and scream and let loose those demons. And I had to find new ways of doing that, you know, and you can only do so much working out and all that sort of stuff. And it had to be emotional. And so, you know, we got here, and it's just, I had to sit and learn to sit with my own company. And, you know, because I couldn't just be in Jane's face bothering her all the time. So we'd have our own parts in the house where we could sit and do stuff. And writing was one of those things. You know, the making music in lockdown, which, you know, a lot of people know about, we'd be doing on social media. that sort of started just because, you know, we were home, and it's, you know, Jane said, oh, why are you writing your book? I'm going to learn guitar. And she knew a couple of chords. She wasn't a good guitar player, but she's so dedicated. She sat for a couple of hours a day, every day, you know, practicing and learning off tutorials on the computer or songbooks that she had sitting around. And now, you know, if you listen to the first song I think we did was "You Got a Friend," which is probably pretty fitting. But right through to now, she's doing songs by George Gershwin with really complex chords, and, you know, it's really, really tough stuff. And so, you know, her guitar playing's got great. And we've learned to communicate and with music. And we thought, you know, it'd be a nice thing to do because, you know, we're feeling the pressure of being locked down, and we're in a nice place, and we've got each other, and we've got some of our grandkids around us. But we knew lots of friends who had no one around them, who couldn't see their families, who couldn't, you know, had, you know, like particularly in Melbourne, as you know, it was really locked down hard. And so we thought, if we just do, you know, we just do a little song every night. It just will send it out. It might give people a little bit of a break. And we started picking songs just from our past, you know, and it was sort of, that was a bit of therapy in its own, because I'd do songs that my mum sang and my dad sang and my sister. I mean, I sang one night, I sang Secret Love, which was a Doris Day song. You know, who knew that I fucking knew a Doris Day song? You know, and so it was just, you know, it was really good. And all we were doing was trying to reach out to people. And it seemed to strike a chord with a lot of people, because there was a lot of people out there who just, you know, every night just wanted a little bit of escape. And music is that escape. And as much as I do work on myself, music is always going to be my joy and my one real. That's where I can just let go and feel the most.
Have you missed that euphoria of the performing experience?
Yeah, it is, but you know, I never really liked, you know, it's like being in the studio. You know, I'd much rather sing in front of a crowd. But learning to sing and at home without a crowd there, and just to your phone, you know, it was a whole new experience for me. But I found that it really allowed me to reach into different emotions and different feelings. So it's part of that growth thing in my life has been doing this in COVID. So it was a really, really important thing.
I wanted to ask you if you had any comment on the federal government's treatment of the arts sector during this time, and particularly in relation to the music industry and live music.
Well, you know, they haven't done anything for us. You know, I mean, really, it's actually shameful the way that there's not just rock music, but the arts in general have been treated by this government. I mean, I think they combined their portfolios with arts and railways at some point there. You know, which is fine if they'd given everybody a free train pass. But you know, I mean, they haven't done a lot for the arts. I don't think they realize how important music, art, you know, movies, literature is to the well-being of people, and how important it is to the, you know, to be able to tell our own stories here. You know, instead of slashing the ABC and, you know, and making it hard for people to make films here, they should be encouraging it. We should be telling our stories every day for our own people. You know, this is what we have to do. You know, I know, you know, I was, like I said, I worked for 4 years up until, you know, COVID struck. And I'd finished a coach's tour. I was okay financially, and I'd got all that out emotionally. But a lot of people hadn't, and a lot of people, you know, a lot of musicians I know are they're just struggling. You know, they're you know, they were already living, you know, hand to mouth, and suddenly they can't. Not only can they not make money, they can't have the ability to escape and do what they love most, is play in front of people. And then you have to look at the people are in our industry. You know, when we do a concert, you know, that what you see on stage for 2 hours is the culmination of you know, 50, 100 people's work putting it together, from the promoter to the security to the vendors to the, you know, the loaders to the roadies, and you know, and that everything was just pulled out from under their feet. And you know, and a lot of them were casual workers who didn't get any job keeper, job seeker. So you know, I know a lot of people who are resourceful. You know, I know some people who were making guitar cases who started making toys, but not everybody could do that. So there's a lot of people struggling out there, and I think it's criminal the way the government has treated the arts. You know, I was talking earlier to Richard Tognetti, who's you know, from the ACO, from the Australian Chamber Orchestra, and these are these guys are the best in their field, in the world, bar none, for the last 20 years. And they're not getting any help from the government. They're not getting any encouragement. They're getting nothing. And if they're struggling, imagine how young up and coming bands are going. It's just from all spectrums of the arts. The Sydney Theatre Company have been battling, trying to keep their heads above water. These are the things that just, especially in tough times like this, that should be encouraged. We shouldn't be sort of slashing funding to anything like that. And I will climb off my soapbox.
What do we stand to lose in the way things are going in this regard, though, Jimmy?
Well, there's a lot of people who, I did a podcast with one of my dear friends, who's Peter McPhee, who's a production manager who worked for me for years. Sneaky Pete, they call him. And Sneaky runs, like Byron Bay Festival. He's been production manager for Elton John for the last 5 years, and he says things like, there were so many incidental and people in the industry that was key people in the industry who now have gone and had to find other jobs. They've had to find something else to do, and he doesn't think a lot of them are going to come back. So the industry is going to have this real huge depth of talent just sucked out of it because they've had to go and do, dig ditches or whatever, which is nothing wrong with digging ditches, but it means that these people who are really good at something else aren't going to be bringing that into the industry. And I'm sure the same thing's happening with film, same thing's happening with dance, the same thing's happening with theatre, you name it.
I'm just going to throw back to Steph for a moment, who has another question from our audience.
Yeah.
Sorry, Steph, I never draw a breath.
No, that was all just great. I want you to write for The Guardian, please. We have a question from Renee. Is Renee there?
Hello, Jimmy. Good to see you.
Hi, Renee. Where are you? I was looking for you there. You're in there.
It is great that you've been entertaining us every night, especially in Melbourne when we can't get out of our house. So that's been wonderful. But I've got a question about, I know you have many more stories that you haven't written yet. How many more books do you think you've got in you?
Oh, listen, I'm just right. I don't know. I don't know. Is that you, Renee?
It is.
I know, and I can see Linda on the screen too. Hello, Linda and Renee come to every show we ever do. And they're so supportive and have been for years. I can't get them able to play for you. It's driving me crazy. Listen, I think I've got a few more of me. I enjoy the process and I enjoy writing. I've actually sort of started dabbling with fiction as well, which is very strange because trying to find your voice. It's a different style of writing, as you well know, Andrew. I've sat down and I immediately sat down at my computer and started trying to be literary, which is just there you are, I can see now, which is a big mistake. Try
too hard is when it goes pear-shaped.
You try too hard. I've sat down and I've got to write the best opening line ever. These are the worst of times, the best of times. I'm just starting to try and find my voice as a fiction writer too. So I think there's I've got a lot of stories to tell. I'm one of these people who I observe people a lot, a bit like Don, I guess. I like to, if I'm sitting in an airport, I could sit and watch somebody walk past and write a chapter on what I've imagined that's going through their heads as they're doing, fighting with their husbands or talking to their kids or, rushing to the next stop, So I'm always thinking of things to write. It's just a matter of, sitting down and being disciplined. So as long as I'm disciplined, you'll get a few more stories, Renee.
I love it. Thank you very much.
Nice to see you. Bye, Linda. How are you, darling?
Jimmy, one last one from me here. I just want to ask you about your own heart surgery in 2007 and just touch on the topic of gratitude for a moment. You say in Killing Time that every moment is special. It could be a cliche, but I think when you've lived like this, it becomes, a cliche for a reason, perhaps. I've battled a few demons as well in my time. Since my surgery, I kind of feel like every second is a second chance at the moment.
Yeah.
Did you get that same sort of sense of gratitude after coming through that experience, or did it take you longer to stop taking life for granted as you kept up basically fighting with yourself for a while?
Yeah, I did keep fighting myself, but part of my growth probably came from that, that initial feeling of being lucky to be alive and how, thinking, I remember going into surgery and being wheeled in, and at first on the way through, I gave my camera to one of the nurses. I said, take some snaps, and that's, just flip it, And anyway, I remember going into surgery thinking, and I'm looking around the night before, I said bye to my dogs and my wife, and went around the house, you know, and did all that. I thought, you know, I didn't know if I was going to make it. And when I came out of it, I was in pain, but I was alive, you know, and that was certainly a part of the journey to grow and to appreciate how precious life is. You know, in the book, I just say that I'm happy to sit and just be now. You know, I couldn't sit still before. You know, I'm hyperactive now, but I mean, I couldn't sit still before. And when I say life is precious, every moment's precious. You know, every minute you hear something beautiful can happen. Whether it's you know, just look at the smile on a grandchild's face or whatever. You know, there's everywhere. Look at my dog, and you know, I've got my dog's ashes. They died while I was, you know, before I wrote the last book, and broke my heart. And I keep them and I go at night, I've got them on my mantelpiece, and I go and tell them what I've done during the day, you know, and every day is precious to me, you know, just, you know, and I just, you know, I want to live and appreciate all the things that I took for granted and skimmed over, you know, minutes, you know, people have been seeing, I've been, you know, on Instagram and stuff, never thought that I'd be out bloody picking flowers. Jane can't believe it. You know what? I'm really good at arranging flowers. Who would have fucking thought? You know, but it's just like, you know, going out and seeing the garden, you know, bloom. Going out, you know, just I've got a bunch of birds here that I go out and talk to and feed, and they all come in hand. And listen, and you know, they're like friends, you know, and just to have those moments where you just, it's not about, you know, being a rock star, being a bloody, you know, on stage. It's not about being smashed. It's not just about being living. It's so important, and I just feel it's every breath.
I find as well that I'm noticing a lot more, you know, smaller things that I would normally not notice.
Yeah, exactly.
But also, I was going to ask just finally, before we perhaps throw back for one more from the audience in closing, whether particularly for someone as hyperactive as you describe yourself, whether things have also slowed down as well, in a sense.
Well, you know, the world has a way of slowing me down, but it's not enough. I'm still rushing around, and I really love something. Then I'll go over there, and I think that's really great too. So I think I'm definitely a work in progress, you know, and I think you know, I don't want to slow down too much, because I do love having energy, and I love having, you know, strength to get up and do, you know, different stuff. But I am. The world is revealing itself more to me, and there's a lot more to it than I ever knew, and that's a really great feeling.
Steph, I'm just going to throw back to you to see if we have any last questions from the audience. We're nearly out of time here.
Yeah, we just had one more, which I'll read because we haven't had a chance to grab her. But Linda asked, Jimmy, once COVID and lockdowns ease off, are you going to be doing a book tour for this book? The tours for the other books were so entertaining and emotional, and I'm sure this one would be too.
Well, this book, you know, Kill and Type actually lends itself to sort of that sort of, you know, spoken word, you know, a few songs here and there tour. But you know, I think first and foremost, I'm just hoping that you know, we get a chance to play some music. You know, I really, you know, we've been planning a tour that was sort of going to be in November, and now it's going to, you know, December, and then, you know, at the moment it's being pushed to March, May. You know, everything is so fluid at the moment. We don't know how COVID's going. I mean, you look at, you know, 8 new cases in New South Wales in 2 days. I don't know what the Premier in Victoria said at lunchtime today. You know, we don't know when things are going to open up. We got to remain fluid. We've got to remain optimistic and hope for the best. But, you know, who knows if touring as we know it is ever going to be the same. You know, I think one of the great things about this is, you know, we're just doing stuff like stupid stuff about, you know, we talk about simple things like washing your hands, you know. So, you know, this whole thing about being a bloke and shaking hands and you know, shaking hands was to show that you didn't have a weapon in your hand. I wrote in this book, and one of the things I've learned is, you know, I don't want to touch people. Just nice to see you. How are you going? We're going to do this, you know. We meet you in a place, you know, where we're equals, you know. And instead of, you know, I just think there's a lot of things we can take from this, and you know, and we have to learn and move forward. We might never be the same, but I hope we get the chance to get out and play music, you know, in some form. I did a couple of shows over the last few weeks. That we streamed online, and because of all the stuff I've been doing online with my wife, streaming online, it felt like the audience was there. So maybe music's going to morph and change into something else. But I do hope that we're back out there in front of hordes of screaming punters at some point.
Jimmy, thank you very much for being with us this afternoon. I think we're out of time, Steph, am I right?
Yeah, I'm just going to have to close off now, but wanted to say a big thank you, Jimmy, and to Andrew. That was such a life-affirming, hope-filled discussion, and the chat kind of attests to that. I think everyone needed this today, so thank you so much, and thanks to everyone who asked questions.
Nice to talk to you.
Yeah, you too. So just Guardian Australia's book club. This is a monthly event, and I should promote it. I can reveal next month's guest is going to be Helen Garner, who is another legendary icon. She'll be in conversation with Michael Williams about her latest collection of diary extracts. So that's on Friday, November 6th for the diaries. Thank you to Australia at Home and to their sponsors, Essential Media, Principal Co, Centre for Australia Progress, Community Council of Australia, I'm obviously reading off a list, and Guardian Australia as well. The next talk is going to be happening on Tuesday. It's going to be a conversation between Labor frontbencher Andrew Lee about his new book, Reconnected, and building community amid an epidemic of loneliness. That is all from us. Thank you so much, everyone. Join our
Cheers, guys. Hey, Andrew, good talking to you, mate.
Yeah, you too. Cheers, Jimmy.
Always nice.
See you soon, I hope.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll talk to you soon.